is Ustinya. Sorry and goodbye, my youthful life. Sorry and goodbye, my lovely friend. They will drag me over to the infernal tyrant for abuse. A young girl is crying in the Ural fanfare. Her hair is being braided and a gown is being put on her. Her attire is wedding apparel. It's not simply a wedding gown, but imperial garb. This is the second half of the 19th century and a performance popular with people, the wedding of Pugachev and Cossack woman Ustinya. This is national clothing of Ural Cossack women. This is a wedding tunic that dates back to 100 years. Ustinya was wearing a tunic like this. Yes, like this one, maybe even more magnificent. Because these are silver buttons, but she was getting prepared to become a tsarina, so that's why her buttons were diamond ones. Chapter 1. Absolutely not a romantic meeting. This love affair is not in the slightest romantic. Instead, it's got a lot of drama, secrets and oddities. Centennial Nan Nevzorova was saying about her meeting with Pugachev. Pyotr Fyodorovich was sitting by the window and looking out in the street. Ustinya Petrovna was running across the street in a camisole and a muslin shirt, sleeves rolled up to her elbows and hands in red paint. She was busy doing needlework, painting wool and weaving waistbands. This is an image of Tolkachev's house, where Pugachev stayed when he visited Uralsk. The legend has it that out of this window he saw Ustinya Kuznetsova as she was running across the yard and fell in love with her. The 16-year-old beauty and 33-year-old imposter. However, Cossacks didn't think he was an imposter, but Ustinya nevertheless allegedly didn't want to marry him, and some said that her parents didn't want to marry her off either. Good gracious, the sovereign! Our daughter is not a princess or a queen. How can she marry you? And how can you marry when our sovereign lady is alive? The obstacle was easy to surmount. The crowned Ekaterina was declared unfaithful and the marriage was announced as invalid. Let alone the Empress Yemelian had another wife godly wedded to him, Sofia, and 3 children. Son Trofim was 11, Agrafena was 6, and 3-year-old Kristina. Every ruler, even imposter, had to have court intrigues. Pugachev supported his high-born mistress, beautiful Lizaveta Kharlova. But the Cossacks didn't like that she started holding a lot of power over him, and they executed her without the Tsar's knowledge. To console the sovereign, they decided to make a match between him and Ustinya. During interrogation in the Orenburg jail, Pugachev said that he had been in the Kuznetsov house, sat on a broad chest covered by a fluffy carpet and proposed to Ustinya. If we are to believe him, Pugachev himself sat here. Still a young girl, nice and modest, Yemelian Ivanovich couldn't but like her, and he also couldn't resist the Cossacks. The Ural Cossacks came to me, most of them old people, and told me, "May your majesty like to get married here?" And I replied to that, "If I do get married here, Russia will never believe that I'm the Tsar." But the Cossacks told me, "If we believed you, the whole of Russia will do so too." Hence, I decided to bring them the pleasure and ordered to find a bride for me. However, there is a version which says that the Cossacks, to the contrary, tried to prevent Pugachev from marriage while he really was in love with Ustinya. In revenge to the Cossacks, he secluded himself with 3 women and spent a long time with them in carousing and revels. Here is the quote. Seeing his absolute proclivity to that, the Cossacks went direct to Pyotr Kuznetsov's home and asked for his daughter to be married off to Pugachev. Chapter 2. 10 days and the whole life. This is not the center of Uralsk, and during the times of Yemelian Ivanovich it wasn't the center either. It had wooden houses and boys playing out in the street. The oldest district in the city is called Kurin. This means an old timber hut of a Cossack. Here, all is not like it was when Pugachev was around, but some houses have been preserved to this day. However, the fate of the Tsar's retreat when Pugachev had lived is deplorable. It was torn down, but in the early 20th century the house still stood high and was even photographed by writer Korolenko. Vladimir Korolenko used to come to Uralsk to research the history of Pugachev's rebellion. He left a lot of notes about this rebellion, left some photos. Some of them were very valuable photos. These photos help us to reconstruct what these old houses where Pugachev had lived looked like. The house inside the Strimanne street is also very old, made out of brick with some pretension for architectural decoration. There are some blind windows, a front porch leading out to the yard and covered with dung cakes. It buckled down under the burden of time to such an extent that it would make an architect curious by virtue of the fact that it could still maintain equilibrium. I often cycle over to the city. Yesterday I took off a photo from the house of Pugachev and his empress. This is what Korolenko wrote to his mother on the 2nd of June 1900. This is the second home. It had stood on the opposite side and belonged to Ustinya's parents. It was made of robust timber, and it's known that Cossack Kuznetsov wasn't rich. This simple hut was built in the middle of the 18th century by Pyotr Kuznetsov. The hut was the residence of the Cossack empress in the course of 2.5 months, even though inhabited by a fake empress, Kuznetsova Ustinya Petrovna. The Empress's palace didn't look like a palace. The wall partitions were built for the museum. A traditional Ural 5-wall hut consists of 4 walls and life centers on a furnace. This is a yurt principle, because there are 4 walls and a furnace in the center. Why are embrasures so low? People were short. Pugachev was 165 centimeters tall. That's slightly taller than me. Pugachev entered and sat on the grass, asking for a bride to be shown. Her daughter-in-law took her by the hand forcibly and led to Pugachev, to which he said, "She's very good-looking," and said, "I congratulate you on being the empress." He gave Ustinya some silver money, not sure how much, but around 30 rubles, and upon giving it to her, he kissed her. Whether she wanted to marry Pugachev or not is not clear. According to the data brought in by Korolenko, she didn't want to marry him. Supposedly she hid from the guests and whispered to herself, "Why are they following me?" All the more so a young Cossack had been her bridegroom. However, other papers show that she didn't resist a lot. They were wedded at the church of St. Peter Paul on the 1st of February 1774. This is the Pugachev Square, the place of execution in Uralsk where everything happened. The church of St. Peter and Paul stood here, and Ustinya and Pugachev were wedded here. According to the legend, one of the priests of the now non-existent Petropavlovsk church refused to wed Pugachev and the Cossack girl Ustinya and was tortured for that. He was supposedly thrown down from the bell tower. This is the tower from which Pugachev threw the priest. Yes, from the bell tower, Father Dmitry. Where court ends and another cathedral stands with peeled-off plaster. Some say that the cathedral is odd because it doesn't take in new paint, and as Korolenko said, had multiple times shed it like scrubby husk.
He seized the city seamlessly, but couldn't take just one building, which was the Kremlin fortress, which Pushkin described in The Captain's Daughter. The professional force withstood a siege of 108 days, which is more than 3 months. Back then, the ataman of the city was Simenev, and his captain was Andrei Krylov, the father of the would-be fable writer Ivan Krylov, and he protected the city from Pugachev. The Pugachev followers blew up the bell tower, but couldn't blow up the cathedral. A little retrenchment was situated here, a small fortification to enhance the fortress's defense in the case of an opponent's breakthrough. Supposedly Pugachev failed to blow up the cathedral because of betrayal in his own ranks. Allegedly Ustinya's bridegroom betrayed Pugachev. The wedding took place amid the thunder of nickeled and dimed guns from the retrenchment in which Simenev gained a foothold with his loyal Cossacks. In the Kurins, Pugachev followers built their own thievish squadron. There was constant shootout. Cannonballs, bullets, Kyrgyz arrows and pungent words were exchanged. The shafts of arrows and darts carried various reproaching letters.
The writers spoke very viciously about the Tsarina Ekaterina. The Simonov peppered insults upon her forced opponent. But nothing could be in the way of festivities. After the wedding, the newlyweds exchanged kisses and all the guests offered them words of congratulation as they allowed them to kiss the hands. Peter III gave 20 rubles for a cathedral, and Pugachev ordered that canticles call his wife as the sovereign lady of all Russia, Ustinya Petrovna. After that, the home was revelled and people went to bow their heads to the newlyweds and toasted health to the right-living empress. Chapter 3. The End of the Empire.
I
wish the supreme and most revered Empress Ustinya Petrovna, my dear wife, to be joyful for countless years. This is how Yemelyan Pugachev wrote to Ustinya. At the end of the letter he said, "My dear Empress, I remain the great sovereign." Did he actually think of himself as a sovereign? He really did think of himself as a sovereign. To his wife he appointed ladies-in-waiting from the Cossack population, surrounded her with luxuriance as much as he could. But 2 days after the wedding he left for Orenburg. The marriage didn't bring joy to either of them. Just sometimes Pugachev came to see her or sent someone over to bring her to him. When she just married Pugachev and acted as his concubine, and she didn't understand all that would befall her.
Она тогда еще не понимала всей сути того, что с ней произойдет. Вот. Хотя
she was often in a state of fear, disquiet, and posed questions to Pugachev. Complaints and tears of the young Cossack woman and the answers of a mysterious and sulky person who suddenly broke into her life, all that became the secret of an old house. Because the real Pugachev wasn't the devil incarnate as history depicted him by old custom. So perhaps in these moments, when alone with his wife, it was even more difficult for him compared with what he felt in the battlefields, during attacks or later during interrogations under torture. When during the interrogation Ustinya was asked how long she had been married, the girl answered that 10 days. It is with doubt that those days can be counted as full of happiness and joy. She was his wife during 10 days. A total of 2.5 months she was his sovereign, and 33 years under hatches in the Kherson fortress, and her entire life was spent there. She lived there under the orders of Ekaterina for being the wife of the impostor Pugachev. Nobody knows exactly what had happened in reality. Only legends and fables have remained after that unromantic love affair. A large share of Pugachev's treasure was supposedly at court of the impostor empress. Ustinya, in her evidence, said the following. Pugachev left her almost all his wealth, namely the money worth 2,000 rubles, plenty of silverware, with a lot of copper and tin too. 7 chests were full of other stuff and dresses, and a belt lined with various precious stones. All this costs a lot of money. But nobody knows what happened with that wealth. Perhaps it is still being preserved somewhere. Legends suggest that later on the person who had bought Pugachev's house unbricked it, but hadn't found any treasure. Another legend says that after Pugachev's execution, Ekaterina forced the Kuznetsov family to change their name to Durakov, so that the fool knew better who to fight for and who to marry his daughter to. Before sending Ustinya to the fortress, the empress decided to have a look at the girl, and after that said that she didn't understand why Pugachev liked her, as she was not as beautiful as people spoke of her. Ustinya was physically exhausted by then. Various interrogations were tormenting, and the road to St. Petersburg itself was devastating. Ustinya spent her last years under hatches together with the first wife Sofia and 3 children of Pugachev. The all-Russian empress passed away aged 51 in a colony next to the Kherson fortress. The reason for her death hasn't been indicated.